All right, I think we are ready to start. Let me start by saying Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good afternoon to all. First of all, I'd like to thank our participants today on Zoom and also on our social media for spending your afternoon with us to listen to quite a heavy topic today. So before I start with the discussion, I'd like to introduce you to our campaign. Today's panel discussion is part of our campaign of kebersamaan and hashtag kebersamaan and togetherness. So it's about diversifying discourse on freedom of religion and belief. We have been implementing this campaign since August 2020. This is our final panel discussions, and we are very lucky to have Dr. Herman Shastri with us and also Dr. Wendy Yi Mei Tian. It's a bit unfortunate that we're supposed to have a third speaker, Dr. Sharir, but he couldn't be with us today. But we will try to address your questions or your concerns as best as we can. And I will try to play a role as a moderator and at the same time as an intervener of today's discussion. All right. So to the topic of our discussion today, it's very interesting because we will look at the role of the state and religious leaders in protecting freedom of religion and belief. So what do we mean by that? So a little bit of background of our discussion today. I like to, quote or cite some of the incidents of interreligious or interracial tensions that we've had in a couple of years back, which really prompt this discussion to be highlighted or to be brought forward. So, for example, in 2018, we've seen, since the transition of the government, we've seen a visible amount of cases that involved racial and also religious tensions. We also believe that this is not the first. For example, we see the civil riots in at Sri Mahamariamman Temple. Also, we've seen hateful remarks by some of the leaders. For example, in 2016, there's a remark from a religious leader saying that a party associated the party members with kafir harbi, which is like a demeaning remark in Islam. Also, in 2000, recently we've just heard a state leader or an MP saying that. Has made an insensitive remark as saying that Bible has been corrupted and manipulated, though he later apologized and withdrew his remark. And also we've seen in 2019 how the introduction of Jawi teaching, for example, in schools has brought the attentions of religious or racial minorities to oppose this as being part of the Islamizing agenda of a certain religious or racial group. So these divisive remarks are very concerning because it's not just coming from any individual, but these individuals have, religious or state or social leaders. So their remarks might bring some, impact to the society, especially in the way of our society think and also interact with each other on a daily basis. But what's more concerning here is that the problem would become, it's not just hatred or racism in yourselves, but also in your behaviors, but also it could be translated into an act of violence. So, for example, we can see in 2018 during the general election how there's one female lone wolf linked to ISIS tried involved in a bomb plotting to bomb non-Muslim religious sites, and also to target non-Muslims during the general election. But luckily, our intelligence or our police enforcement um, has proactively done their job in order to catch the suspect. So we see this is not a minute or like a remote problem, but it's a systemic fear, or it's a systemic problem that we have in our society. So just before we go deeper into the discussion, to summarize our these previous discussions for Kebersamaan campaign, we see this problem of hate speeches, we see this problem of racism and religious hatred. It's not only about the narrative, the hateful narratives in that is spreading among the society, but we also see this as a systemic problem that I just mentioned. So, for example, the socioeconomic inequality between people, between races and religions, how the problem of lack of interreligious or interracial dialogue that we don't have, we are lacking in our society. We don't really want to speak or listen or understand each other, and of course the politicization of race and religion. But without further ado, I don't want to I don't expect our panelists to solve these problems in 1.5 hours of discussion, but this discussion really is about moving forward. How do we hold religious and state leaders accountable in protecting, freedom of religion and belief, and how what are the steps or what are the policy reforms, if needed, or improvement that our panelists today might give or might suggest to us. In the meantime, please ask questions in the Q&A box. We will address that in a little while, but without further ado, I'll let Dr. Wendy to speak. What do you think about our topic today? Please.
Thank you very much, Aizat, and thank you, KMU, for inviting me to be one of the panel speakers. And indeed, it is a great honor for me to be here and speaking on this very important topic. And especially if you look at the conflict that is happening around the world today, I think today's discussion topic is really relevant. Ask important questions on what is the role of state and religious leaders in protecting the freedom of religion and belief. So I guess this is really, really important. So I would like to begin by thanking Aizat, and I'm so honored to be on the same panel with Dr. Herman. It's a great privilege. So probably I will begin by sharing some slides, Aizat.
Yep, go ahead, Dr. Wendy.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. I will try to move to the second page. Hang on. I'm not sure how can I move to the second. It's not actually moving to the next page.
Can you press on the space?
Yes. All right.
Yep.
Okay. Right. Hang on. Yeah. So coming from the academia, I always believe there are many lessons we can learn from history, right? So I would like to structure my discussion and to share my thoughts today based on two parts. I would like to begin by sharing from the historical perspective, the important role of state leaders in protecting the freedom of religion and belief. And then after that, I'll move on to discuss the role of religious leaders, focusing on the importance of dialogues and to bring out the best in oneself and others in order to achieve peace. So let me begin with some historical accounts of King Ashoka, and I'm sure all of us have heard of this name before, right? The famous king of the Indian Maurya Empire, which we have all learned in especially in our civilization subject. So as we know, at the height of his rule, King Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire actually stretched from the modern day Iran through almost the entirety of the Indian subcontinent. So although in the early days of his reign, King Ashoka has gone into many warfare, and one of which he conquered was the Kalinga country, which is the modern Odisha state in India. And the sufferings inflicted on the people in Kalinga actually moved him into deep remorse. And as a result, he renounced armed conquest. So it was at this time that he came in touch with Buddhism and adopted it. So as a result, King Ashoka has come to be recognized as one of the most fascinating ancient monarchs for his decision to renounce war and his insistence on religious tolerance. So he controlled a vast and diverse Mauryan empire through peace and respect for diversity. He protected the freedom of all religions, embraced every ethnic and national groups, and strove to create a flourishing spiritual culture. Upholding the principle of freedom of religious belief, he also promoted lively exchanges between people of East and West, helping to bring them together. And he even sent emissaries of peace to distant lands in the West as Macedonia, Syria, and Egypt in an effort to facilitate international philosophical and cultural exchanges. So for this, King Ashoka is remembered as a model ruler and is considered as a role model of the ideal politician. Now, the second historical figure who demonstrated similar virtues of a great leader who protected the freedom of religion and belief is Emperor Akbar, who lived in the 16th century of the Mughal dynasty or the Mongol dynasty. So commonly known as Akbar the Great, and I'm sure we have heard of this big name also, he is actually a Muslim emperor of India and was held in high esteem by his people, as he was always working for their welfare to ensure their collective happiness. And for more than 3 centuries of the Mughal rule in India, Emperor Akbar was known for expanding the empire's boundaries and establishing a system of government that embraced a great diversity of people. So although the people under his rule was from different ethnic, religious, and linguistic groups, he did not give importance to such differences. All subjects were equal to him. He never discriminated between the Hindus or the Muslims in holding administrative positions. He did not practice religious discrimination. And instead, he strove to promote harmony between followers of Islam and Hinduism, and even invited scholars from various religious traditions to the palace to hold religious debates. So through his ability to dispense justice and protect the freedom of religion, he conquered the hearts of his subjects. Now, why did I quote these two historical figures? What can we learn from these historical accounts? So from my own observation, there are two main points. Firstly, both these renowned state leaders were able to perceive the common identity of their fellow people, that is humanity, despite ethnic or religious differences. And this is very important. It's a very important point because this perception guided their actions and guided their administrative policies, where both King Ashoka and Emperor Akbar treated everyone in their empire equally. Now, my second observation is they both were able to recognize the dignity of all lives. They recognized that lives are most invaluable. And it was actually recorded on one of these edicts erected during King Ashoka's reign that after he witnessed the sufferings of the people in Kalinga, the state that he conquered, that there were corpses scattered everywhere, burned houses, people were wailing, there were so many dead people, and all the sufferings. And because of that, the king Ashoka actually felt remorse and he deeply regretted his actions. And so King Ashoka did what no one has done before, renounce war and renounce the use of weapons. So both King Ashoka and Emperor Akbar promoted harmonious coexistence. And as a result of both, both their empires enjoyed centuries of peace and security. And they enjoyed social harmony, expansion of sciences, and of knowledge. So from this historical account, what I'm trying to say is we learned that when people are able to perceive the common humanity in each other, despite religious and ethnic differences, and when people are able to recognize the dignity of all lives, people across different ethnic religious groups can actually coexist and live in peace and harmony. And in fact, Many great cities of the Middle Ages, such as Cordoba, the capital city of the Umayyad Caliphate, and Medina, are historical proof that different religions can exist side by side and they can also flourish together. So that is why it is important for state leaders to be able to perceive this and to protect and respect the freedom of religion and belief of their people. Now, next, I would like to discuss the role of a religious leader, because today's topic also encompasses what is the role of a religious leader, right? So I would also like to touch upon the role of a religious leader. Now, there are many amazing, great religious leaders from the different faith organizations around the world. And these great, religious leaders, they have done amazing work for peace, for humanitarian, protecting the freedom of religion. And they even go beyond the confines of their own religious communities. So, sorry, I missed this slide just now. So, however, for today's discussion, I would like to focus on Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, a religious leader who is also known as a Buddhist philosopher, an educator, an author, a peace builder, and also a poet, who has received the United Nations Peace Prize in 1984 and was bestowed with the excellent honor of the Glorious Gabina Grand Cultural Award, bearing it the title, the Grand Universal Sage, given by Gabina, which is the Federation of National Award Association of Malaysia, in 2006. Now, Dr. Ikeda is the third president of the Soka Gakkai International, a global community-based Buddhist organization that practices the humanistic philosophy of Nichiren Buddhism that promotes peace, culture, education, centered on the respect for the dignity of life. Now, as a religious leader, it is amazing that Dr. Ikeda has engaged in over 7,000 dialogues with world leaders from different ideological spectrum, from the socialist to the democratic nation, thinkers, educators, theologians, individuals, and even young students, as well as, of course, religious leaders from different religious backgrounds. And the list of people that he has conducted dialogue with include world-renowned historian Professor Arnold Toynbee, the father of peace education, Professor Johan Galtung, the champion of peace, Mr. Nelson Mandela, Professor Linus Pauling, the Nobel Peace Prize for Chemistry, the former president of Soviet Union, Mr. Mikhail Gorbachev, and of course also the former president of Indonesia, Allahyarham Abdurrahman Wahid, and of course many, many more. Now, Dr. Ikeda recounts that as a Buddhist religious leader, and especially as a human being, he said he has long pursued the path to lasting peace for all humanity, and he believed that the exchange of thoughts and wisdom through dialogue is indispensable to realizing that aim. Now, the question some of us may ask, why did Dr. Ikeda, as a religious leader, so strongly believe in dialogue in his efforts to promote peace and religious harmony? So my answer to that is, it finds its roots in his personal experience, his personal war experiences, and his connection to his mentor, Mr. Jose Toda. Now, as we all know, during World War II, the Japanese military government glorified war, and many young boys were drafted into the army. And that included Dr. Ikeda's own elder brother. And unfortunately, he was killed in Myanmar in action. So this has led Dr. Ikeda, to experience the sufferings of people, especially when political leaders and even religious leaders exploited religion and coerced religious freedom as justification for conflict and holy war. So with the painful loss of his brother, Dr. Ikeda is absolutely against war. Now, Dr. Ikeda met his mentor, Mr. Jose Toda, the second president of Soka Gakkai in 1947. And it is from his mentor, also a religious leader, Dr. Ikeda learned about respecting the sanctity of all life and the role of religion in eliminating all misery and suffering from the face of the earth. And also from the history of Soka Gakkai, Dr. Ikeda learned that both the first and the second president of Soka Gakkai, which is Mr. Makiguchi and Mr. Toda, as religious leaders, they were imprisoned in 1943 for their refusal to compromise their belief when the Japanese military government imposed the state Shinto religion on the entire population as a means of glorifying its war. So in other words, both Mr. Makiguchi and Mr. Toda, as religious leader, they persisted and they persevered in the human rights struggle for religious freedom and justice. Hence, this is the starting point of the Soka Gakkai International Movement for Peace and Human Rights. So when Dr. Ikeda became the third president of this organization in 1960, he inherited his mentor, Mr. Toda's vision, and continued to develop the Soka Gakkai International, or we call it the SGI organization, into a multifaceted movement for peace, culture, and education, with members around the world focusing on respecting the sanctity of all lives. And under the leadership of Dr. Ikeda as a religious leader, the members of Soka Gakkai worldwide are striving through various peace, cultural, and educational activities to bring about an awareness of the interconnectedness and common bonds among the people. They realize when the superficial differences, that we always talk about, such as the differences in ethnicity, differences in religion, in language, or even in culture. So when such differences between people become less significant than their collective experience and shared destiny as humanity, a spirit of coexistence and mutual appreciation can actually be nurtured. So with this example, what I'm trying to say here is it is really undeniable that religious leaders have very important role in protecting the freedom of religion and belief. And because a religious leader acts as a role model and they lead by example, so and often people listen to religious leaders, right? So as such, religious leaders need to demonstrate that peace is the prime purpose of all religion. They need to bring people together through humanistic values and mutual respect that all religion abides by anyways, right? And not segregated based on hatred for differences, dogmatism, fanaticism, or even self-righteousness. So, and there's this very interesting metaphor I would like to share here that Mr. Jose Toda, the second president of Soka Gakkai, he once said, let me quote, he said, religious differences would be quickly resolved if great religious leaders such as Shakyamuni Buddha, Jesus Christ, and Prophet Muhammad could all sit together in one room and talk to one another. He believed that they would come to an agreement on many issues out of their shared desire to realize peace and happiness for all human beings, unquote. And I believe you will all agree to this as well, right? So, and also in one of the dialogues that Dr. Ikeda had with Allahyarham Abdurrahman Wahid, the former president of Indonesia, they both exchanged the principles of their practice from the Islamic and Buddhist tradition. President Wahid shared with Dr. Ikeda that he, as a religious leader, in the religious school that he founded in Indonesia, he has underscored the importance of respecting the diverse traditional culture and customs while preserving the essence of the Islamic teachings as their foundation. And he also stressed that in his religious school, he need to not only nurture Islamic scholars and leaders, but also expand his students' perspective to include fostering those who embody different religious values rooted in a community. And in response to that, Dr. Ikeda explained that Buddhism also cannot exist divorced from society or reality. So that's why Buddhists must always strive to behave in a sensible, positive manner and behave as good citizens, contribute to the welfare of others and community and contribute to peace. So these kind of exchanges of dialogue has shown an undisputable fact that religion has been foundational to many cultures and civilizations. So that is why dialogues, especially interreligious dialogues, and dialogues that is being conducted by KMU, and I really applaud you, Aizat, and your young, fellow KMU members, to organize these things, because these interreligious dialogue can be a powerful force in promoting mutual understanding. And it is through such dialogues that people can exchange views and develop better understanding of each other. Because, when people of different faith, when they can relate to one another openly and with great sincerity on a heart-to-heart basis, circles of friendship can be constructed. And this is precisely why Dr. Ikeda, as a religious leader, he made every effort to engage in dialogue with various people from different backgrounds. And it is no doubt that religious leaders have great influence impacting the relationship of mutual respect for religious diversity and religious freedom within one religious community to another. So I would like to conclude by saying, throughout the history of humanity, right, we have witnessed large and small wars, conflicts and violence, all fought in the name of religion. and prohibiting others their rights to practice their religion. And so many people have sacrificed, precious life have been sacrificed, and it has caused so much suffering and misery. And so we cannot repeat our mistakes, and we must choose to create an era of peace. So the cycle of sufferings that afflicts humanity will never be severed by repeated attempts to redress only the symptoms while avoiding the fundamental causes. So to address the fundamental cause, now the first step is to instill in people everywhere this unshakable principle of the absolute dignity and worth of all human life. This is important, right? And the current world situation reveals that because people lack respect for one another, and as a result, intercultural strife, religious conflict have escalated because people lack that kind of basic respect. So the challenge really facing us right now, as we are embarking on today's dialogue, is how do we develop a vision that inspire hope in humanity amid such dire circumstances? Isaac started, the conversation today by highlighting, a lot of issues that we are facing today. But it is important that we could inspire hope in humanity through dialogue. And we could talk to one another, we will understand each other better, and develop the courage not to fear and deny differences, but to learn to respect one another and bringing out that compassion that we all have, being able to put ourselves in other people's shoes and have this, this imaginative empathy that reaches across differences. So it is also vital that we reflect deeply upon the history. That's why I started my conversation today, with this idea of history, right? So we need to reflect deeply on history of exchange among civilization, and we need to study and learn from the past, because the richness that arises from differences or from diversity in cultures and civilization has long been an invigorating force for society. And as President Wahid said, there is no necessity for civilization to clash just because they are different. And if they should clash, it is usually the result of misunderstanding or prejudices rather than their actual differences. So now looking at the challenges facing humanity today, really, I would say humanity has no alternative but to return to the fundamental point of departure. And I would like to really end here by sharing this Malay proverb, kalau sesat di hujung jalan, balik ke pangkal. So the pangkal jalan, or the departure point in this context that we are talking about today, refers to the purpose of religion. That is for human happiness. And although different religions have specific doctrines which may differ, but all religions can cooperate for the sake of peace, for humanity, and we should work towards that. And as demonstrated by the current COVID-19 pandemic that affected the entire world population, solution can only be found if we work together as one humanity. Because it is a reality that all our lives are interdependent and all our lives are interconnected. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wendy. It's very interesting that you go beyond, to the historical part where coexistence and also humanity prevailed. But we will go deeper later on how do we implement this, principles of dialogue, especially in the Malaysian context, and based on your experience, working on this issue. Right. So to further, expand the discussion, I would like to invite Dr. Herman. Dr. Herman, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. I want to thank all the organizers who have put this forum together. And I consider it a privilege and a joy to be able to participate. Apparently, some people are having a bit of difficulty to get in, but I've just given them the link. That's why I'm typing something. All right. Thank you very much, Wendy, for giving a very comprehensive view. Now, I have been in this engagement interfaith dialogue for many, many years, and it's been a part of my life's vocation, and I feel also the future path of humanity lies in following the path of moderation and dialogue. So we are not in disagreement there. But I'm sure you would agree with me that if you cite examples of glorious days in religious blossoming and interreligious relations, there are equally many other examples, negative ones, in other phases of human history or in other contexts. So when you compare the both, you would be able to see that there are forces at work which go beyond religion, or religion may precipitate a certain kind of chauvinism that can also destroy structures of interhuman and intercommunity and interfaith relations. So I want to begin my conversation here from bringing all of you back to the experience of the World War, which was indeed a shocking feature for human history. For the first time in human history, they had come close to a capability of destroying the whole of the world through the weapons and things that they have created. So out of that grew out this global consciousness of being a community of nations. And of course, I'm referring to the United Nations. In fact, I think a good number of all the international organizations draw their inspiration back to after the two world wars. So in the Christian tradition, some of the most creative global movements for peace and justice and interfaith relations all came out after the war. So at the heart of this movement to bring humanity together and to try to avert war and conflict was crystallized in this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think this discussion would be a ray if it does not in some way link to the very important document which in a very beautiful way puts down or makes clear what it means to be human and what it means to live as a human being with all the rights that are entitled to you. So there are 29 articles, and I think the first article is such a beautiful one. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Of course, people can look it up on the internet and it's all available, so that's no issue. But I think this is such a beautiful line. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So religions would endorse this, but they have to spell it out in ways that would highlight this, or else they do a disservice to religious belief. But then there is one particular article, and that is Article 18, which speaks specifically to the freedom of religion. And I read that everybody has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Now, all these words, thought, conscience, and religion, are contested. We use the same word, but what does it mean for a person to have free thought? What does it mean for a person to exercise his conscience? What does it mean for everyone has the freedom of religion. This rights, this article continues, includes the freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Okay, so I think that is a common basis that has universal appeal. All governments support it. It becomes a basic international instrument for engaging in meaningful human dialogue in our world today. So I'm not saying that this must be the only prime document, but it is an important one. And there are many other very important, equally influential documents that have come since the world wars in the last century. The topic today is the role of the state. And I think this is the problem, because in what way does the state exercise its governance to provide these basic guarantees to its people? And I think that is the crucial point. And I think if you look at all the various contexts, I don't want to just speak about Malaysia because we might get a difficulty, but if you speak of all the different contexts, you would find that there are different models. A country that is religiously orientated and use religion as the basis or equal to a secular constitution cannot achieve to a great extent what is required in the articles of the Universal Declaration. So they cannot provide all the basic freedoms. There is a privileging of one religion over the others. If you go to a majority-minority political configuration or matrix, you would find that the state can use this majority-minority configuration as leverage to promote a particular political position, platform, or persuasion. And a good example of that is what's happening in the United States today. That you have a religious right that is promoting a certain thing and using the tools of state, and the state endorses many of the cry of the religious right. The religious right have a right, of course, but they are not they don't have the complete right, because by exercising one part of it, you deny the freedom of the others. But it's interesting here to point that the state plays a role. And the third one is the secular model. And I, from all the years of engagement and exposure to interfaith dialogue, I guess that is the best a model we have. It's not perfect, but it assures every citizen the right to think or believe or exercise that belief in a way that would be granted to him under the Constitution. And the state is neutral in dealing with these essential freedoms. So the role of the state, for me, the answer is that it must exercise governance in a way that all citizens have a right to believe, exercise that belief, practice that belief, but with this extra notation here, not in the way that we think that they must belong to a particular religion. I think a person who wants to believe in pantheism or believe in some other thing or do not want to believe should also have that equal right. So when we engage now in this afternoon, the conversation, freedom of religion, I think it may be constrictive in that sense that we only think only the religious people have that should have that freedom, but the others who don't believe in the way we believe should not have the right, but cannot, because the state must ensure and protect the rights of all, because it goes back to the simple line, everybody is born free and with equal dignity and hope. And secondly, that everybody has a right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So where do we see the contradictions? In the exercise of law, before the law. And so here in Malaysia and everywhere else, you see that it is many a times, many of these issues of the exercising of this right is not met with just response. And why is that so? Because the state has vested interest, or political parties have vested interest, or majority minority relations have vested interest. And so you want to deal with freedom of religion, we can say all religions teach us to dialogue, to respect each other, and so on and so forth, but you cannot reach that point until you engage the political interests that are acting as an impediment to these realities on the ground. So I end by just making one other point, the role of religious leaders. That's also very interesting. I have been long enough, and I'm also currently a part of the interfaith movement in Malaysia in the council. I've been also part of the government jawatan kuasa, mempromosi kefahamanan dan keharmonian. So we are invited to attend all the nice ceremonial functions so that the photo op would be there, and we show how wonderful Malaysia is. And sure enough, sure to a great extent, Malaysia is wonderful. But all the problems, as you have cited in your introduction just now, Aizat, is that so easy to deal with these issues because there are various forces at work. And some of these forces also co-opt religious leaders. So even religious mentalities can be co-opted and made as ideologically driven platforms to create division and support or suspicion and fear. And this is quite sad. So in a dialogue with say, for example, with the Buddhists, they would say, oh yes, we all one humanity, we all share the one planet, and so on and so forth. But then you go to a Buddhist country, you would find that Buddhists are doing some strange things, and some of them are endorsed by some Buddhist institutions and monks. And the best part is the state works in cohorts with some of these, or co-ops some of these religious leaders to promote hatred or target minorities and so on and so forth. Of course, I don't want to leave this conversation just only pointing out an example about Buddhist country, Islamic country is the same, Christian country also is the same, and even Hindu. You have in India now the rise of Hindu nationalism. So what is the role of religion and religious leader in protecting freedoms of religion, I think it is the principles of governance. A governance that will uphold the basic freedoms as enshrined in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It doesn't have to be only that, but I think that many other documents that have come as a result of that can enhance that and deepen that understanding. For example, based on that, the World Council of Churches with the Vatican, we had come out with this document called Christian Witness in a Multi-Religious World. And this was completed in 2015. And what we did here was looking at the basic rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, how best we can profess our faith so that it does not step on the rights of others. So a freedom to profess your faith doesn't mean that you can coerce, doesn't mean that you can demean, it doesn't mean that you can claim that your religion is the only truth and everybody else is not truth, because that is also hurting and inciting. So in a modern world, you need to find the kind of language, and this exercise continues continually. So in Malaysia, for example, just last year, there was some tension between Hindus and Christians in regard to proselytizing. And so one of the way forward was, we said, don't blame each other now. First, let us make a covenant, let us make a bond, let us make a pact, let us say, okay, what is right and what is wrong. So we put in a Malaysian context about 10 points, what we think, 5 points, what we think is would be acceptable, and then we move along. So that the state, when it exercises its power, principles of governance, they would know that all religious communities or people who have belief or exercise their freedom to think will abide by that. So that is my proposal in this forum, that the role of state, they must seek to be neutral, which is almost an impossible task in Malaysia, but never mind. We hope that we will move in that direction. And secondly, that the religious leaders would, when they are speaking, they can speak from their faith perspective, but it must be in line with the universal principles of human rights. Because if not, they get into all this theological language and so on and so forth. You have cited the example of one person citing that the Bible is not the true Bible of the Christian and so on and so forth. That's freedom. Wouldn't you think so? Why should we take that freedom from anybody? But that person who had given that, who takes that freedom, must also allow others the freedom to criticize Islam. Or maybe say something like, you know, your holy book is not like that and all that. And then you can realize the sensitivities, and the state must then draw the perimeters and say how far and how not. So in our case in Malaysia, the Council of Churches, we took the position that in the parliament, such things should not be said. That one person speaking or making a comment about another religion that he does not profess, because then that is going to lead to all kinds of sensitivities. So this is a good example. I think I'll stop here and give more time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Herman. From your explanation, it's very like policy heavy kind of explanation, which is very interesting. So I think before we go to the questions, I'd like to pose a question to both of our panelists. So Dr. Wendy emphasized more on, the importance of dialogue to cultivate, the sense of humanity and also understanding among the religious leaders, society, so on and so forth. And Dr. Herman, give an example of how Malaysia, or how the state, including the state leaders and religious leaders, should be bound by these, universal human rights, where freedom of religion and belief should prevail in our system. But now we're talking about Malaysia, which is like in a Muslim majority context, where setting aside the secular argument. For example, we have good models, international models already. For example, if you're familiar with Aman Message, or Marrakesh Declarations or Beirut Declarations, which have been concluded or agreed by different religious leaders, including Muslim scholars or Muslim leaders, who agreed upon few principles to eliminate discrimination and persecution against religious minorities, whether they are interfaith or intra-faith minorities in their own countries. So from this model, I'd like to know more about your experience, Dr. Wendy and Herman, in terms of your engagement with the government or with the society. Share us a few examples, few practical examples that you have experienced. For example, Dr. Wendy, what is your experience in terms of like interfaith dialogue with government? How do you propose that to government? How do you talk to government to convince the government to have this in schools, in our education system? The same goes to Dr. Herman. How do you approach, or to what extent is your engagement in order to improve our laws or our policies in terms of freedom of religion and belief? So I'll start with Dr. Wendy.
Thank you very much, Aizat. Thank you for that very interesting question. How do I, as an individual and as a citizen of Malaysia, and of course as an educator. So my work is mainly based on education. And what I've done basically is, there's two parts to that, because your question is asking about what are some of my efforts in engaging with the government, right? So I would like to go a little bit further than that. So I would like to share first my job as an educator in University of Malaya. So basically what I did was, I think education is the most powerful tool. I remember Nelson Mandela once said, if you really want to change a society, you have to go back to education. It may be the slowest process, but that's the surest process, for change to actually happen. So what I did in University of Malaya, when I started to join University of Malaya, is actually I started a course on peace and humanities studies. And in this course, actually, that's where I start to talk to students about, this understanding of a dialogue, interreligious dialogue, and there's a lot of opportunity for the students to actually engage, themselves in all these activities through the course and through the educational subject that I've, that I've written for the university. And in fact, I'm very happy to say that a lot of my students who have actually completed that course, and then actually end up, becoming, volunteers in NGOs and, really giving back to the society. Now, so to me, that is contributing to the society, and that's my engagement, perhaps indirectly, but I guess that's very important and that's very powerful. That's where I'm actually fostering a lot of young people who have this understanding. Now, the second one, more direct, my engagement with the government is because basically I'm also the fellows in the Institute of Youth Research under the Ministry of Youth and Sports. So I work in this institute in the Ministry of Youth and Sport, mainly in terms of consultation and also in terms of developing policies together with the ministry. So in that sense, also we are actually working a lot towards highlighting the importance of this interreligious dialogue. And we actually came up with some indexes for young people in Malaysia, to really identify, in terms of religiosity, how religious they are, how, but truly when you talk about religiosity, it's not just about how faithful you are, but how much do you translate, the values of your religion into your practice, So people may say they are very they are very faithful, they are very religious, but to what extent those good values are being transferred or, or being expressed in your attitude and behavior. So in that sense, I'm very much engaged with the government, in terms of, especially in the context of youth development. And one more thing which I'm currently doing, which is also kind of like, my goal, which I'm working on, which I've also talked to you, Aizat, is about coming up with a module for interreligious dialogue, right? So currently I'm also a fellow of CAICID, which is an international interreligious association based in Vienna. So what we are doing is we are trying to, advocate this idea of interreligious dialogue. But what I find missing really in this interreligious dialogue, even at the international arena, is this understanding of global citizenship. So this understanding of global citizenship is not really embedded, in this whole context of the discourse on interreligious dialogue. And I think that is a big missing junk. If we do not put this element of global citizenship into this religious dialogue that we talk about, we are missing a big part of it. So because of that, I'm actually working, hopefully with civil societies, together with NGOs like your organization, Aizat, and hopefully with the Ministry of Youth, and also the Ministry of Education, hopefully we can actually come up with a module that focuses on interreligious dialogue, especially for the young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Herman. Dr. Herman, you have to unmute. Yep.
I think the point you raised, Aizat, is that you want to bring it down to our own context, so that we can see where the points of contention are and where the trigger points perhaps that leads to some of these interfaith problems we have. I think I tried to hint to you this whole question about humanity, equality, dignity, and rights. This has sociological connotations, this has political connotations, this has religious connotations. As a religious practitioner, I think it is my spiritual vocation all through my life to go as deep as possible to understand what this means. The equality of all human beings, the dignity of all human beings, or if I use a theological a word from my own tradition, that people are created in the image of God. And I think only when one is self-critical, self-reflective, self-engaging in this spiritual vocation, you cannot speak about it in the public. When it comes to the societal, say in a context like Malaysia, it varies from context to context, then it becomes very strange because all religions would say that. All religions would perhaps use their own theological language or spiritual language to speak about the sanctity of life, the essence of life, or the beautiful human soul, and all these kinds of things. But in actual reality, not every soul is happy, and not every soul find that they can be free to think and to search and to reflect. Some are coerced, some are kept into a particular thought pattern. And all these forces operate from the outside. And so this is the difficulty. So if we want to match that up, the dialogue must show that dialectic between social forces and how religious thinking and reflection can either break patterns of incitement and hate building, and promote peace and understanding, or the other side, as I pointed out earlier, that they infect and enhance chauvinism, bigotry, and so on and so forth to their religion. So perhaps I can give you one example from Malaysia so that it becomes very easy. We have for many years sought to form a national interfaith council, which means that all religions and all religious groups can come together. It does not mean, therefore, that is a showcase of religious freedom. It's only a showcasing of the plurality and the capacity of religious institutions, as varied as they are, to aid the state to maintain peace and harmony within society. So in Malaysia, we cannot arrive at that. So there are various different groups, they call different names, but there is no national national interfaith council, and especially in engagement with the majority Islamic community. And the reason given to us is, we are the majority, you are the minority. Our religion is the religion of the Federation, and you are minority religions. So now, would that be a valid argument? Would that be in consonance with the deepest aspirations of your religious teachings? Would that in any way give clarification to these words that we use, the dignity of all persons, the equality of all persons, and the right of all persons to live together in community and to carry their own religious beliefs? So that is one example. Of course, I can point to many others, but this is the difficulty, it seems, when we come to the ground. The aspiration, the vocation is true. It begins right inside, but the social forces at work, that needs to be always thought about. And I think if you just pick the point of religious extremism, that's also interesting. What drives religious extremism? Why is it that religions can be instrumentalized to cause hate? So when you seek that answers, then you would find that some of these forces are operating in the level of politics, not so much emanating from a religion. But religion is being used by certain political forces to achieve certain agendas. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Dr. Herman. So I sense, Dr. Wendy and Dr. Herman have clearly explained about, different types of advocacy, how these types of advocacy should not be separated or undermined from each other, but also should be complementary to improve freedom of religion and belief, like dialogue or through education. And I sense, a little bit of challenging tasks to change, at the policy, to create change at the policy level. Yeah. So now I'd like to allow our audience to ask questions. First, we have a request to post questions via audio. I'll allow Syed Alatas to talk. Yep, go ahead.
Hi. I guess you can't see me, right?
Yes, we cannot see you.
We can't see
Hi.
you. Can we see
Yep.
you?
Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, thank you very much, Aizat. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Dr. Herman. How are you? Yeah, sorry, I prefer to do it by audio because
No problem.
it's just
Yes.
too difficult to type. Yeah, so I wanted to make a comment about advocacy, which of course I strongly believe in. Creating more awareness and interest in each other's religion is very important. But I also want to say that I think the problem in Malaysia is less with the people and more with the elite. Not only the religious elite, but also with the political elite. And with the religious elite, I think it is more with some religions rather than others. My impression is that as far as the religious leaders are concerned, um, the problems lie mainly with Muslim religious leaders, some of them, of course, and some of the Christian leaders, particularly the Protestants, who are perhaps at worst evangelical, but at best maybe indifferent to dialogue. Um, uh, so, therefore, the role of advocacy would not only be to strengthen relations between different religions in Malaysia, but also, and maybe we haven't seen this, we haven't looked at it in this way, it should also be to put pressure on the elite, especially the political elite, to be more serious about interreligious dialogue, about interreligious and inter-ethnic relations, because I think all our problems come from them. You know, the lack of commitment among state religious officials, among politicians, the lack of commitment, serious commitment to dialogue, to harmony, to understanding, they don't have it. We all know, right? They are more interested in self-preservation. They're more interested in politics. And they're not serious about governance, or the true, in the sense of the true meaning of governance. So, don't you feel, I mean, I guess this would be my question to both of you, that dialogue has to move to the next level? Okay, at one level, creating understanding and harmony among the rakyat, that should always go on. But shouldn't dialogue also act as a form of, function as a form of pressure? Just to give you a very simple example, right? Religion now is used in a divisive way. It's the divisive function of religion is useful for politicians because it helps them to divide and rule. The danger for many politicians is that if Malaysians think along class lines rather than religion. For example, if Muslims and Buddhists thought along class lines, then the working class in Malaysia, the majority of whom are Muslims and Buddhists, would vote along the lines of their interests as working class, and that would not be good for the politicians who who depend on communal support. Right? So the idea of dialogue then would be to get Muslims and Buddhists to think in terms of the universal values of Islam and Buddhism, which includes, workers' rights and freedom of speech and stuff like that. So, shouldn't dialogue move in that direction? I guess I'm suggesting that it should be a bit more radical and be able to constitute pressure on the state. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prof. Farid. So it's a very interesting question because, like I mentioned in the opening, that this, and we have gathered a lot of views from our panelists in the past discussions that religious hatred and racism in Malaysia are very systemic problem. So it's not just a theological problem. So it's very a valid point to raise there by Prof. Farid, that shouldn't we make dialogue more radical, if you want to use that language, or more comprehensive, not just touching about common values, but also really talk about inequality, especially the socioeconomic inequality, politicization of religion. So what do you think about that, and how actually we do that? Yep, whatever that is feasible right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Prof. Farid. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you that dialogue is the way to go, and I echo what you have suggested. And in fact, I think there's one more very important element to add on to that is not only inter-religious dialogue, we also need to really work on intra-religious dialogue. And I really think there isn't enough of intra-religious dialogue, because within a religion itself there's a lot of denomination, and there's a lot of misunderstanding even within the same faith itself. So I think what I really want to say here is, yes, interreligious dialogue is definitely something that we need to talk about, and we need to talk about not, of course, we need to really focus on what are the common values, like I mentioned just now. We need to go back to the fundamental purpose. We need to return to the original purpose of the religion. And I guess the original purpose of religion is for the happiness of humankind. And the purpose of religion is to unite the people. And the purpose of religion is really to bring happiness, and for peace. So going back to the fundamental purpose of religion, and in order for us to do that, we need to address very difficult questions, like Isaac was talking about inequality, and stuff like that. So I guess, these are not perpetuated by religion, but religion has been used as a tool to perpetuate these issues. And as you correctly mentioned, and especially in the context of our country, politicians have always used this as a tool, to cause divide, and divisiveness among our people, and especially now among the younger generation. So I guess the younger generation now really, even civil society and NGOs, we need to come together. We need to come together with this common purpose, and we need to engage in dialogue. And as you have correctly mentioned, to put pressure, so the importance of civil society is really indispensable in this sense. So I guess we really need to come together and have this dialogue, and we really need to put across this pressure to our state's leader, and during this dialogue, and I would like to advocate, especially among the young people, knowing that a lot of these problems are being caused, by these, state leaders using religion as a tool. All the more, the young people, we need to recognize that how these things, these negative narratives are being used. So if these are the negative narratives which are being used, then all the more we need to go against, we need to counter these narratives. So in order for us to be able to counter these narratives, we need to relate our own personal experiences. We need to share our personal experiences. There's a lot of positive narratives out there, in our everyday lives, how a Muslim neighbor, communicate with a Chinese neighbor, with an Indian neighbor. There's no issue at all, and we live in peace and harmony. So these kind of everyday life experiences, it should be out there, it should be spoken, and it should be loud enough to counter these negative narratives. So I think it's important for the young people now, especially the youth, the young people, as well as civil societies, NGOs, come together, and let's create more positive narratives to counter this negative narrative, and learn, and have this wisdom to be able to recognize that this religion is being used to divide our society, and we need to counter that. Thank you.
Dr. Harman, unmute. Yep. Quick response.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Alatas. Nice to hear your voice, although I cannot see you on the screen. I think I would agree with many of the points that you raised, and I'm sure this is coming from the rich experience that you have had in that journey, and also in my case. And so I think we use the word dialogue, but we mean many different things. And I think there's a dialogue of life, there's a dialogue of better understanding, harmony, and all these words we use. And I think some of them resonate with the human heart, because that's a good intention, that's a beautiful thing, and that's leads us to an exposure of a variety of religious experiences that enhances human understanding. So I think that is no problem. But I have one problem with when we start talking about education. What do we mean by education? How do you teach religion in schools? And if you teach religion in schools, which religion are you going to teach? Because within this religion, there are different streams. So then it also becomes a contentious issue in school. So I often in open discussions, I also say, please don't go down that line. It is better to just speak from the perspective of common humanity. So it's not hurting anybody, it's not threatening anybody, and there's enough history of common humanity, the negative and the positive that we can draw upon to help people look to the future. I think one of the recent debates that I had, one person had said, less religion and more common humanity. And I think that's a good sort of takeaway, because I think today as we move along, and I agree with Professor Alatas as he's sharing just now, that dialogue must also include the rights. We must have dialogue deal with the rights if there's going to be transformation and change. So what's the use of us dialogue and say we are both religions that invoke love and peace and so forth, when the whole world is going to be destroyed by climate change? So I think that is just one, again, example. I can speak of so many, and I see this happening in the World Council of Churches. When we go, we call it an ecumenical conversation. And because it's a world body close to the United Nations, we try to bring as many voices to the table. And it's a slow process, and you have to learn to deal with many dimensions. Where do the indigenous peoples of our world stand? Where do the women stand? Where do those who are deprived of water as a right of humanity in their countries stand? So all these factors come in, and then religions, if you have a religious conviction, you know what you must do, and religions must work together in order to protect the resources and guarantee the rights, and put pressure on state to listen to these voices. So I think if we move it that way, join with the NGOs, join with civil society, then there's I think it's a powerful learning process that we are ourselves trying to bring a better coherence between personal convictions, religious beliefs, and outward expressions of it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Herman. So I guess it's about how do you make it more practical? How do you make it more radical? If you like that to use that language, it depends on your how do you frame your dialogue, or what do you want to achieve from your dialogue? So, but definitely the issues of socioeconomic inequality or climate change should be incorporated in the dialogue. So it should not be exclusively about theology or interfaith issues, but you can also expand that to the next level. Especially it's possible at the civil society level, because you don't have that bureaucratic challenges, those things. Yeah. But I also that should answer Eugene questions. Also my friend over there posed a question about how do we make it more practical, and also how do we reach people who are, I would say, like have less education level, or who live in rural areas. Because when we talk about interreligious dialogue, or understanding differences, it's a big issue, big topic. So these people do not have time, because last panel discussion we talked about how people, the Hindu Sangam representative said something about people they don't have interest to talk about this issue, because they are so preoccupied with finding how to feed their families, and also people in rural areas, they're not exposed to these issues. So very quickly, maybe Dr. Wendy or Dr. Herman, how do we reach people outside of our own bubble? or the city? Anyone?
I think I'll go first and I'll try to make it very short so Wendy has a chance also to step in. I think one key word, we should not patronize. I think even when we start using language like that, I have difficulty because then we think, oh, we must now go to reach the rural areas and they are different or whatever. I think when we talk about common humanity, there are things we can learn. In fact, there are more things to learn from the rural areas because they are closer to nature. Their life is much slower. They are more community-based than urban jungle. So that's one. Secondly, I think there is a lot of goodwill, a lot of collective experiences of living together in rural areas, even speaking each other's language, even sharing each other's meals, even learning to have religious places close to each other. So in Malaysia, you have streets in the ancient days, in the olden days, where all these religious buildings were closed. You know, so there we have something to learn. So today it becomes landmarks for us to imbue the young with these visions and to reclaim this legacy and have that we have from our forefathers. So rural areas, I think, are very crucial in that also. And then, of course, I want to associate rural areas to indigenous communities, ethnic communities. And I think this should be highlighted. Malaysia is not just the major races. There are hundreds of other ethnic communities who have a right to existence, have a right to their language, have a right to profess their own culture and faith and belief systems. And these things should be also showcased, not just for tourist attraction, but perhaps in many other intercultural activities and dialogue. So I think in some of the civil society dialogues, they make sure there's always an orang asal there to keep us on the ground, that we don't forget, as if we own the whole of Malaysia and we are the only ones who can decide for the future of our country. So that's a good spiritual reckoning of the reality of rural life. So.
Yeah, I think it's it relates back to Prof. Farid's point where we need to also address, because it's a class issue. So also it's a demographic issue in terms of understanding, different religions and beliefs. All right. Also, we've got a question here. We have so many questions. We might need to expand a little bit of our discussion today. But I would like to address a question from just a sec, from Brina. So a question about, thank you for your insightful presentations today. I particularly appreciate your reference to the need for intra-faith dialogue, which I think is often even more challenging than interfaith dialogue within all traditions. Thinking of the Malaysian context in particular, I would like to know if you have any thoughts regarding how Islamic minorities such as Shia Muslims could be better protected. Namely, what can state or religious leaders do in situations where before dialogue there is need for basic safety. So I will open that to our panelists if any of you have knowledge about this. Also, Prof. Farid Alatas, you can also join in because this is also your specialization. But I just want to respond on behalf of my organization, Community Muslim Universal. We don't really, we're not, we do believe, we also promote education or intra-faith education among young people in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, it's very hard, like you rightly pointed out, that it's very hard to have an intra-faith dialogue because of the structural problem of institutionalization of religion, also the Sunni Islam in Malaysia. So it makes freedom of religion and belief in Malaysia, it's such a complex issue to discuss, and we can't touch everything. But I'm not sure about Shia community in particular, but we have an example where when we talk about more radical or more, we need to push for a pressure on policymakers. We need more religious leaders. We're talking about the role of religious leaders, also from the religious minorities, to step up and get organized. And for example, the Ahmadiyya community that we have engaged, we brought a number of young people to go to their mosque in Gombak, and then talk about the issue or their challenges, prosecution by the state authorities. But at the same time, you can take an example from their community where they have that there's recently a legal challenge or strategic litigation that they have been doing to challenge the action from the religious authorities. But however, the court in this case decided that since Ahmadiyya community are not recognized as Muslims, thus religious authorities do not have any jurisdiction on them. So in a way, you won your argument, from being from the political or religious persecution, but at the same time, you've lost your right to be recognized as Muslim. So my point is that strategic litigation is important. Religious minorities themselves should not rely upon, other people, especially the political figures, to speak for themselves. But they really have to come up and engage with these issues, especially the structural ones. But my last point is that as an inclusive faith-based organization, we also educate our young people with models, international models that I've mentioned before, UDHR of course, but also in the Muslim majority context, like Amman message, how Muslim majority countries recognize religious Muslim minorities like Ahmadiyya Muslim, Shia Muslim as part of Islam. So they shouldn't be persecuted or prosecuted by any form of law. So without also recognizing there's some problems in the sects, the sectarian divisions themselves, such as their attitudes towards women, so on and so forth. But that's a different issue. Yeah, and let's if there's a response from Dr. Wendy on that in that regards, intra-faith dialogue.
I think Isaac, you have covered that very nicely. But indeed, like I've mentioned just now, I think, intra-faith dialogue is really crucial, because I guess if we really go back to the fundamentals of religion, and I know Islam itself is a tolerance, is a very tolerant and is a very peaceful religion, but the fact that we have got so many different factions of it, is really very much, I would like to say, is how the people interpret the religion, how the different factions or the different leaders in the different factions interpret the religion. And unfortunately, a lot of, I think this is not Islam, I've seen a lot of other faith organizations as well, including Buddhism, in Hinduism, or even in Christianity, is a lot of times is the way people interpret it according to their own egoistic purposes, and it's not even, the fundamental teachings of that religion. So I guess to identify that is really, really crucial through intra-faith dialogue. So I guess maybe Prof. Farid will have lots more to add to that. That's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll allow Prof. Farid to speak. Just briefly, Prof. Farid, because we need to address more questions. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I guess I should say something about the Sunni Shiite thing, right? Yeah. I don't know where to begin. We have shown ourselves to be among the most intolerant of countries when it comes to Shiism. And this idea that Malaysians or Malaysian Islam is moderate is not valid anymore, because we are one of the very few countries that actually persecutes Shiites. It's not just a matter of attitudes, but it's actually state-sanctioned persecution. raiding their homes, raiding their places of worship, confiscating their materials. It's absolutely intolerable. And despite the fact that in Islamic tradition there's no such thing as Shiites being outside of the fold of Islam. So for the non-Muslims to understand, it's something like some Christians who say that Catholics are not Christians. That kind of attitude, right? Which is not the dominant perspective in Christianity. So, but just very briefly, I want to say that this has to do with morality. It's not religion. People say that religion is the problem. The problem is morality. You have bigoted religious leaders who are not rooted in their own tradition, who engage in this kind of hate speech and practice intolerance. So religion is not the central problem. If you have less religion and you have more, secular leadership, it doesn't necessarily deal with the problem, right? In fact, a lot of the destruction, death, destruction of property in the world was, was due to the actions of secular leadership. Pol Pot regime, Stalin, Hitler, the Americans, secular Americans bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I think the problem is the lack of morality in our humanity today. Let me just, my last point is this. How can we solve problems like this? In the case of anti-Shiism, if the Malay Muslim leadership, Sunnis, stand up and say that we as Sunni Muslims do not tolerate anti-Shiism in this country because Shiites are Muslim brothers, then I think the leadership will change their tune. But because there's indifference or fear and people keep quiet, then this kind of bigotry and persecution goes on. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Farid. Yes, again, it's I mean, both issues. I mean, from the society, also like the authorities or the state, from the state, which is a long way to go, especially from Malaysia. So it's we need more conversations on this. Discussing on how to improve, policies and so on. Yes, Prof. Dr. Herman.
So I think when it comes to the intra, it's also very interesting to see some new developments in regard to that, because unless you are open to self-criticism, there's no future in intra, because intra is another mechanism to impose view of the majority over the minority. So intra-faith discussions must have this discipline of being self-critical and to change as it relates to sensitivities outside the faith body. So I give you an example. In Christian circles, we do not encourage Christians to use the word crusades anymore. That we are going on a crusade for our religion, which is like jihad. And why is that? Because it carries historical baggage, it has a certain connotations, and it does not in any way reflect the true essence of our faith. So I think there needs to be an updating of the way we use religious language. I think in your introduction, you spoke about kafir and how some people are using it. I think in some contexts, religious leaders must say, we forgo this. I think in Indonesia, they have done it. The majority group there have said they don't want to use this kind of words because it's insensitive. So I think there needs to be some kind of humanizing effect in regard to that. Secondly, I think quickly just to tell you that if you are talking about the role of the state vis-a-vis some of the sensitivities of minorities, I think the good example is in Malaysia, the disappearance, the enforced disappearance of certain people till today, it has not been resolved. And therefore, it only raises the question, the instruments of government, what do they do? Where are the checks and balances? And the checks and balances has nothing to do with religion. The checks and balances have everything to do with political interests and political manipulation. And so if a religious body wants to respond to it, then there should be pressure upon for political interests, because that's the only way you're going to find some form of transparency in resolving that issue.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like we mentioned before, it's all multi-dimensional, you know, like how your governance work, is it transparent, you know, your socioeconomic level, status of your people. Yeah, it's all intersectional. Yes, Dr. Wendy.
Yeah, I just would like to echo what Dr. Herman said, and I totally agree, you know, with what Dr. Herman just mentioned. But I just want to add on one more point to that. You know, when we talk about this, you know, this dialogue, you know, when we talk about this intra-faith dialogue and also interfaith dialogue, I think we need to dialogue on one very hard topic, you know, one very hard issue. That is, we need to, like what Dr. Herman just mentioned, we need to have this reflection, and we need to identify these fundamental negative functions in our lives. So it is really not the religion itself, you know, it is the negative, the fundamental negative functions in our lives, you know, due to power, anger, greed, you know, all these kind of things that we are making religion, you know, we are scapegoating religion, you know, and we are scapegoating the community of that religion, you know, into feeding into our fundamental negative functions. So until and unless we talk about this fundamental negative functions in our life, and we got to change that, because if that does not change, you know, whatever we are doing, we are just addressing the symptoms. So there is this, you know, a phrase that I heard, you know, many times being uttered by Dr. Ikeda. He said, you know, there are many revolutions. We have talked about the French Revolution, we have talked about Industrial Revolution, and there's so many revolutions, and none of these revolutions will bring about sustainable changes. But the only revolution that will bring about sustainable change, that is human revolution. So human revolution is actually the change in the individual themselves, you know, by recognizing this fundamental negativity in our lives, and we have to consciously make an effort to change that. You know, otherwise we are just addressing the symptoms. So I think I totally agree with what Dr. Herman just mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with the, you know, final questions here. Perhaps on the positive, we want to end our discussion on the positive note. Maybe this one post. I mean, for you, Dr. Wendy, is there any? Hold on, let me read. Can you elaborate more on, you know, any local history context that highlights the coexistence, especially in, you know, freedom of religion and belief in our own history? And how, when you mention about global citizenship, how do you incorporate global citizenship in our education system, especially if you, I mean, especially now, like this generation who might be polarized, or who are open to more, you know, I would say diverse perspectives because of, you know, technology, social media. So how do you incorporate that in education? And sorry, if you have done so, how do you see the responses from the young people that, you know, you have experience with? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isaac, for that. So I guess I will first address the first question about, is there any particular part in our history that, you know, that can be considered an era that we can actually look upon? To be honest, you know, as I was going through some of these, you know, historical, fractions in historical issues or historical knowledge from our, you know, Malaysian textbook, Indonesian textbook, and even Singapore textbook. And to be honest, I'm actually kind of disappointed with the kind of history that we have in Malaysia. I mean, it's not the history that I'm disappointed, it's the knowledge or the information of history that we have in our own, historical textbook. It's very limited, it's very narrow, and it doesn't even give you the entirety of the Malaysian history, to be honest, and there's so many missing parts in the history, that is not mentioned in our history book. So as a result, a lot of our young people, including myself, who is the product of our own education system, we don't really have, this holistic understanding of the history, of the richness of civilization in Malaysia, and we only learn history, as though Malaysia only starts from Paramaswara, Malacca, and that's it. But what happens before that? We have the Majapahit Empire, we have the Srivijaya Empire, and those times, is, the tolerance, the peacefulness, the exchanges, during the period of Majapahit and even Srivijaya and even before that is amazing, and that's where we really learn about the contribution of each different civilization. But that is not mentioned in our history book. So it is very sad and it's very, very unfortunate. Yeah, so that's my answer. So to me, we have lost a big part of that part, in our knowledge system, in our education system. I think what's important is we have to go back to that. We have to look for that, and we have to, what's more important than just hopping back to what happened before, it's important that we create our own history. So how do the young Malaysians today create a new history, a new civilization of Malaysia from now towards the future? It is possible. We can create this kind of history that we want to create. So it really depends on the young people today. So that is why I'm really, really passionate about education, and I always believe it's hard to change. If a Malay proverb says, "Melento, what is that? Bulo biar."
Yeah. Biar dari rebungnya, yeah.
Yeah, dari rebungnya. So I kind of like, don't really have much to say about our leaders, but I have tremendous hope on our young people. That's what I'm doing. Now, with regards to global citizenship education, now there's three very important elements of global citizenship, which I actually, try to incorporate in education, and also especially in the action or in the practice of interreligious dialogue. That is, the first element is to have wisdom. So being a global citizen is very important, that we must be able to have that wisdom to act and to take the right action, and to have the wisdom to be able to see the interconnectedness of things. Like what's happening in with the current pandemic, COVID-19, it didn't just happen like that. There's a lot of interconnectedness between the human activities and the environment, the things that we do, how we destroy the environment. The virus did not just pop up like that. So there's this very strong interrelatedness between humans and environment. And unless we have this wisdom to be able to understand this interrelatedness, we will do things as though we are the only people living on this planet Earth. So I think that's very important, right? And secondly is courage. So the second very important element of global citizenship is to have the courage not to deny differences, have the courage to not to deny diversity, but to respect differences and to celebrate diversity. So that needs a lot of courage, and to have the courage to do the right thing. It may not be the most popular thing, but if that's the right thing, you got to do that. That's courage as a global citizen. And last but not least is compassion, empathy. So I think compassion is a very important point here, because when we have compassion, we'll be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and we'll be able to empathize what the other people are feeling, what the minorities are feeling, what the indigenous people are feeling, what the victims, of this kind of structural violence are experiencing. So until and unless we have this compassion and empathy, we can imagine, we will always, be trapped with our own fundamental negativity that I've talked about earlier. So I think whatever we have been talking, whether it's in the structural, we call it structural violence, in the systems, I think ultimately these are all man-made. These are all man-made because fundamentally human beings have this very strong negative tendency, but how, until and unless we look into that, we do that self-retrospect, we look into that and we really, work on it consciously to understand inclusivity, to talk about equity, and to really translate all these into actions, into concrete actions. And not just pure theology, or pure discourse or pure rhetoric. And I totally like the point that Dr. Hirman mentioned, sharing of collective experiences. And I think that's very, very precious, And in Malaysia, we are so fortunate. We have got so much, diversity. We've got so many great civilization, and there's so much collective experiences. And these are the ones that we need to capitalize on. And these are the voices that we need to bring forward. Again, like I mentioned earlier, to counter the negative narratives. And I think there is hope. There is hope. People have done it. We just need to do it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, I apologize to our participants because I couldn't take all questions, but you guys can still engage with us on the comment sections, especially on Facebook, or reach our panelists here via email, or you can Google them perhaps, and then ask, and then we have put their bios on our website. You can have a look, and you can reach them via email. So now we have come to an end of the discussion. So I'd like to allow our panelists to make a conclusion, perhaps on a positive or more optimistic note. What what should be done, or maybe like what's the main takeaway from today's discussion? Perhaps I'll start with Dr. Herman.
I hope what I'm going to say is not going to add more confusion to this concluding remark. But I think it's something that I've been engaged in the last few years, and that is the state has no religion. I think we have to investigate this, interrogate this. The king may have a religion. The ruler of lands may have a religion. Colonial power may want to promote as a religion. But the state apparatus is a governance apparatus. And the state is directed by the constitution. Even religious societies have a constitution. And in that constitution, there are guarantees for the rights of citizens. So I want to end this note by saying today what we are talking about, the role of religion and the role of religious leaders. We are talking about the rights of citizens who are exercising and securing, safeguarding their rights as found in the Constitution. So the state cannot override that. If the state is using political motivation to change aspects of the Constitution, then the people should rise up to change this. Because the question like freedom of religion is a right offered to all citizens in Malaysia. That's one. The second thing I think is that when we are talking about a religious leaders' role, I think they also must come under the Constitution, which also makes sure that they have, they know their limits, that they cannot just get away by creating problems, and some of it is manufactured for political reasons. So there's a hopeful future in that. Now people are communicating much more, connectivity has increased. People are being influenced by in a borderless world, getting more informed, and some bad influences of God, but we hope that they will be listening more to your forum that you're offering, KMU, and begin to think more genuinely about these things. But I think the future is that the people will be not talking so much about their religions, but our common destiny as a people, and how, whatever you believe, whether you believe or don't believe or whatever, how you are going to play your role. And I see that perfectly in my residents association where I live. They're all on the handphone, they're all connected. And so when there is one thief that comes in, or there's some strange happening, everybody is alerted and everybody contribute. And they're not talking Islam first, or I'm Indian, or you're Chinese, or this, or whatever. But this gives the real concrete example that this is the future. Thank you.
Well, for me, I think what are some of the takeaways that we have talked about today? And I guess, again, I would like to go back to the importance of education, because without education, a lot of times people will become very ignorant. And when I talk about education, I don't just talk about formal education. And I also mean informal education, non-formal education, and these are very important aspects of education, not just the formal education. So because without education, people become ignorant, and from ignorant, people become fearful, and from fearfulness, people become hate. People will hate one another. So that's why I guess, going back to the roots, of the problem, to rectify these roots, I think is education. And educating the young people, so that the young people, together with the civil society, together with NGOs, we need to work together. We need to have collective efforts, and to go back to the fundamental, issues that the religion is really tackling, and religion is really talking about. That is our common humanity. So I guess, so the main thing that I really, really would like to highlight is education, collective effort, and through collective effort, we need to put pressure on the state. We need to put pressure on the religious leader, and we need to go back to the fundamental prime point or the purpose of religion, that is to serve, that is for the happiness of humankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wendy. So my major takeaways from today's discussion is, we've discussed so many things. So Dr. Herman really talked about that, really give an emphasis on structural reforms in Malaysia, from the secular argument, how freedom of religion and belief should be enjoyed more meaningful, at all levels. So it should not be only talking about, on the superficial level, where we portray, that we are multi-religious or multiracial society, but really, what does it mean on the ground? How do we translate that into our policies, laws, system, so on and so forth. And also Dr. Wendy, offered, such an interesting point, also like another type of advocacy that is very important, which is education, which also as an KMU believes in, where this is an ongoing process. People, hate, religious hatred, and also racism, also an ongoing problem. So we need, a long-term, education is a long-term solution, by inculcating these values of humanity, commonness, to talk to each other, to reduce or to not to solve, this racism or religious hatred problem, but really to mitigate the problems that we're having right now. And also the most important thing, the role of religious state and religious leaders, whether it's secular, on the secular argument, or non-secular argument, is that to have more, to involve more religious leaders or people who are different, not just from the majority religion or race, but involve these people in the policy making, talk about hard issues such as socioeconomic inequality, climate change, people who have been either minorities, who have been marginalized, whether because of their faith or because of their identity, especially indigenous people. We should be the dialogue itself should be more critical. It's not just about, you're exclusive to your religious group, but also we should start being in solidarity with each other, try to move forward, talk about, engage with different people, groups, and also policy making, though we have to acknowledge that there's so many, challenges. But yes, a very interesting discussion. We thank our panelists and also our audience for keep, engaging with us. Also, I'm very sorry that we couldn't address all questions. Very interesting questions. Perhaps you can join us late next. We have on this Saturday, we have a coffee talk where we will extend this discussion, the same topic, but in Malay language with youth leaders and also youth thinkers. You can go to our Facebook page or website, kmumalaysia.org, to find more details. And also, KMU Malaysia and also Sisters in Islam are organizing an international public forums in response to